The dreaded eviction, an absolute nightmare for both landlords and tenants. Evictions are costly and very, very time consuming. It can involve months of back and forth, potentially with courts, attorneys, and your tenants. Hi guys, I'm Adam Manley with Good Life Property Management, and today we have everyone's favorite topic, the dreaded eviction process. I'm going to be going into a lot of detail today about the whole process from start to finish, really giving you guys kind of an overview of what that whole process looks like. I know a lot of owners out there are familiar with evictions. They know of them. They generally know what's happening during the process, but I feel like I can bring a lot of clarity to actually what happens during the whole process from start to finish. And before we jump in, just a reminder guys that if you enjoy videos like this, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more content just like this. So I know I mentioned we're going to be going into great detail about the whole process of evictions themselves, but there's actually a step before the eviction process that we have to talk about, and it's arguably the most important step of the entire eviction process. And that's actually not evicting your tenant at all and attempting to negotiate with them. Now, this is going to come as a surprise for a lot of landlords. Evictions can be super emotional. There can be a personal aspect to the property that the tenant's renting from you. So a lot of times landlords really want to make sure that they, put something on the tenant's record and, go to the ends of the earth practically to make sure that the tenant pays for the pain that they've potentially caused this landlord. So while attempting to negotiate may not initially sound like a good first step, it's actually the best thing that you can actually do in a situation where you may have to evict your tenant. Evictions are absolute lose-lose situations. As I mentioned at the top of the video, they cost a lot of money having to hire an attorney, and they can take 3 to 6 months, potentially even longer, depending on the exact situation with your court system and how evictions work where you live. There are lots of different ways you can attempt to negotiate with your tenant, but this could actually lead to you getting your property more quickly and have the tenant just get out without any courts or attorneys having to get involved. As I mentioned, there's lots of different ways you could do this. Sometimes simply just asking the tenants and having that real conversation with them and asking them, hey, this isn't working out. How can we come to an agreement where you get out of the property, I get my property back, and turn that lose-lose into a win-win. So before we get into the actual process, I wanted to spend some time talking about the most important part of having to potentially evict a tenant, and that's starting with a negotiation and trying to get them out that way. All right, guys, so now we're actually going to be getting into the actual process of the eviction once your tenant has become delinquent on rent. And the first step of the eviction process is actually posting a notice to what's called pay rent or quit. You'll post this notice depending on your individual lease, and notice periods change from city to city. So make sure you have a good understanding of when you're allowed to post this notice and how you have to post it, which is also a very important part of the process. The notice to pay rent or quit is essentially the first step of the eviction process, and it formally lets the tenants know that they are officially delinquent on rent, it's past the grace period, and they have a specified amount of time to pay the balance, or what's called quit, which is essentially surrender the property. And again, this is the first part of the actual eviction process, and the timeline for the post will vary from where you live. So step 2 of the process is actually filing the what's called unlawful detainer with your local court system. And again, this will depending on your notice periods and when you're actually allowed to file this. So check with an attorney or with your local municipality to get a better understanding of when you're actually allowed to file the unlawful detainer. But that is what actually will get the eviction trial started. So your attorney will file that unlawful detainer, and you'll generally wait a little while to get a date in court where you'll appear before a judge for a trial, in this case for non-payment of rent with your tenant. And that's generally the second step of the eviction process. So the third step of the eviction process after you filed the unlawful detainer is actually obtaining a summons from the court. Now, the summons will go out to both you and the tenants will actually have the opportunity to contest this summons. If they do, get ready for a trial. You and your attorney will need to appear in court and present your case to the judge, outlining why they've been delinquent on rent and why you're bringing this case against them. If the tenant does not contest the summons, the judge will generally issue what's called a default judgment. They'll write up what's called a writ of possession, which will also give the sheriff instructions on how to remove the tenants. Now that's the fourth and kind of final step of the process once you've won your case, is actually regaining possession of your property. All right, guys, so the fourth and final step of the eviction process is actually getting your property back. You've made it. So if you win your case and the sheriff has received the writ of possession, they will post this at the property, letting the tenants know that within a specified amount of time, they're going to be coming back to the property to potentially remove anyone left inside of the property. This is what's called the lockout procedure. You'll want to be really prepared to meet the sheriff the day of the lockout and also have a locksmith there to change all of the locks just in the event the tenant's going to be taking a key with them. Once the sheriff completes the lockout and clears the property, you officially have possession of your property back. Again, the timeline for all of this is really going to depend on your local court system and how the eviction laws in your area work. But that is the view from the 10,000 foot level of what it's going to look like to evict your tenant for non-payment of rent. So you've learned a little about how the eviction process works, and I'm sure you're probably asking yourself, well, how do I actually stop all of this from happening? It's a really great question. Here at Good Life, we found a really great way to prevent evictions is just with very thorough tenant screening up front. Develop a great application screening process and use it consistently for all of your properties. Set limits for things like credit, previously owed rental payments to landlords, things like rent to income ratio, number of accounts in good standing on their credit report. There's a lot of good objective criteria that you can use and screen your tenants for up front to do as much as you possibly can to prevent an eviction from ever happening. All right, guys, that wraps up the video on the eviction process. Just a reminder, screen your tenants well up front to prevent the eviction. If you do have to go down that road, try and negotiate first. Quick recap of the process: you post the notice, file the unlawful detainer, trial or summons date, and then you get possession of your property back. Thanks so much for tuning in. Just as a reminder, stay tuned for part 2 of the video where we're going to be talking more about the costs of an eviction in a little bit greater detail as well. Once again, I'm Adam. That's Olivia behind the camera. We'll see you guys next time.